Welcome to Secret Story. I'm the guy who likes to think they have their life in check. I've always been ambitious, I had my future mapped out early. That's what you get when you're raised by a family of lawyers. I graduated with first-class honors in law and landed a job at a prestigious law firm. Of course, I could stay within the family practice, but that wouldn't have been a challenge. By the age of 32, I'd become known as one of the best barristers in England, an accolade to treasure and wear like a considerable badge. My circle of friends is varied. Some work in the same field, and then there are my other friends, the folk who don't live on the right side of the law. They're not only handy friends to know, they're my bread and butter. And champagne, you see, preventing someone from 20 years stretch in prison keeps me in my accustomed lifestyle. My connections ensure that the streets are still paved with naughty people, but the law is less cut and dried than many think. Some people don't mind paying my fee to ensure their freedom. I don't look like the typical barrister. At least, that's what I've frequently been told by the women I pick up in seedy bars. They say I look too rough and ready to be in my profession. They reckon I'm more suited for a fluorescent vest and hard hat than a black cloak and wig. I've been likened on more than one occasion to Tom Hardy. And truthfully, that does not harm my popularity with the female jurors. I'm not stupid, I know how to play the jury like the proverbial fiddle, and if a bit of flirting and a few intense stares get me, and, more importantly, my client, the result we want, who cares? You like all that pouncing about in a cloak and wig, don't you? My client Dominic said one evening as we drank in a particularly seedy bar in the bowels of Manchester. Court is like a theater, Dom. I clinked my beer bottle against his. Cheers, what do you mean? He raised his eyebrows, creasing his forehead with several lines. I took a long drink, enjoying the cold fizz at the back of my throat. I wiped a hand across my mouth and burped. Excuse me. I prepare for court like an actor prepares for the stage. It's all an act, Dom, a competition as well. I'm not really interested in what crime has been committed. None of us are, not really. I took another swig from the bottle. Of course, we purport to care, but, at the end of the day, it's all about winning for most of us. It means putting someone behind bars or keeping them out of jail, it's that simple. As you know, I win 9 times out of 10 with my connections. Dominic finished off his beer in one colossal slug. Well, make sure you keep Ted out of jail tomorrow. That's all I'm asking because that bitch Chloe Klein has a right old reputation. Don't you worry about Chloe. I said. I know exactly how to deal with her. Make sure you do, mate. Dominic stood up and rifled his pockets for the cash for our next round of beers. I watched him walk to the bar, his body cumbersome, his brain even thicker. The fact of the matter, dear people, members of the jury, and whoever else might be interested, is that Chloe has the hots for me. Now, she isn't exactly pretty, certainly not as pretty as my dear wife, Samantha. Who can resist that? If all I wanted was the missionary and the occasional half-hearted suck, I'd stick with Samantha. My wife is beautiful, sweet, and the quintessential homemaker, but, oh God, she bores the shit out of me between the sheets. And she knows it. She's aware that she can't and doesn't accommodate my voracious sexual needs, so she turns a blind eye to my activities. Well, almost, I'm sure you will agree that this predilection is a turn-on. That evening, after sharing beers with Dominic, I journeyed home, my mind ticking with thoughts of Chloe. I needed to win the case the next day, thus keeping Ted the deadhead out of jail because I had $100,000 and my reputation riding on it. If I lost, my kudos with the underworld would be seriously affected. I needed to ensure success, and as I turned the key in the front door, I knew exactly how to guarantee a win-win situation. I arrived at court early the next day. Walking into the grand foyer, with its stained glass windows and polished floor, I spotted Chloe talking quietly but animatedly into her mobile phone. Walking to her, I leaned against a wall and flashed one of my most disarming smiles. Look, I have to go, Louis, she said, abruptly ending her conversation. Oliver. She coolly extended her hand. Good luck today. I have a feeling that you're going to need it, I smiled. I doubt it. I think I have this case in the bag, so to speak. But we can never say never, can we, Chloe? She grimaced and flicked her hair across her shoulders. I wish I had your confidence, Oliver, she replied icily. Then again, not all of us take backhanders. Some of us like to win fairly and square and ensure justice is done. Ah, yes. I'd almost forgotten that's why we're here in the first place. As legal adversaries go, you are one of my most threatening. Your performance at the McDonald's trial last month was impressive. You're making a name for yourself, I'll give you that. I watched as the iciness in her facade started to melt. Maybe Chloe wasn't an ice queen after all. Why, thank you, Oliver, that's very gallant of you. I like to give credit where credit is due, and you look beautiful today. I've often wondered what you wear under your cloak. I appraised Chloe's cleanly cut charcoal gray suit, tailor-made, now you know. What else do you think I'd wear? I looked at her intensely, pausing long enough to create tension. Oh, I can't tell you that, Chloe, or you might accuse me of letting my imagination run away with me. I watched her mouth curve into a huge smile. Are you flirting with me, Mr. Cohen? I shook my head. No, I wouldn't do that, Miss Klein, MS, she hissed. Sorry, Ms. Klein. Shall we grab a coffee? We're not due in for another couple of hours. I'm intending to do some last-minute preparations. That's why I'm here so early. Christ, she was making this hard work. Oh, come on, a quick coffee and a chat won't harm us, surely. Chloe's forehead furrowed while she considered my offer. She looked at her wristwatch and then back at me. Okay, I guess a coffee wouldn't do any harm. But, if you think for 1 minute you'll delay me and throw me off course, you're sadly mistaken. I'm determined to win this case. There's nothing wrong with having a little determination, I said, putting a hand on the small of her back. I personally find it an admirable trait. We ordered coffee, and within 20 minutes, I had Chloe laughing at an anecdote about a peer I'd saved from going to prison. I noticed that when my foot touched hers under the table, she didn't move it away. Result, I'd melted her guard within 40 minutes, and she was openly receptive to my flirtatious advances. Perfect. No wine or effort is needed, just a coffee and footsie under the cafeteria table. Can I make a confession? I said quietly, leaning across the table, my fingers linked. We're not in church, Oliver, but go on if you must. Chloe bit on a perfectly manicured nail, her face adopting a coquettish look that didn't suit her. I leaned back in my chair. There, I've said it. Chloe's cheeks flushed pink. I'd never noticed how dark her eyes were until that moment. They were like chocolate buttons, which widened the longer I stared at her. That's very naughty of you, she eventually managed. You aren't telling me that the thought of me has never crossed your mind? I asked. I don't believe that. Time was ticking, but looking at my watch would have been obvious. I surreptitiously glanced at the cafeteria clock. I think probably any woman that has crossed your path has fantasized about you, Oliver. And well, you know it. You do have a reputation. I drained my cup of coffee. Let's do it then, I said boldly. Chloe's eyebrows shot up. You're surely not serious. I'm deadly serious. She gave me a sardonic look. I assure you, I don't need help on that score, Oliver, so, I spent another precious 10 minutes seducing Chloe. I sat in the seat beside her and whispered all the things I wanted to do to her. You breathe a word, Oliver, and I swear you are in deep trouble. I reached for my briefcase and stood. I promise this will be our little secret. From the cafeteria, we signed in at the security desk before walking to the chambers, our footsteps resounding against the wooden floor. In the chambers, Chloe turned to me. Right, Oliver, let's get this straight. I like being dominated. As you can imagine, I'm in control of every aspect of my life. I opened my briefcase and took out a pair of handcuffs. I'm always prepared for any eventuality, Chloe. Now, turn around and put your hands behind your back. Let's pretend you've been arrested for being a naughty girl. Chloe's eyes glinted before she turned her back to me. I was hoping you'd say that. Grabbing her hands, I put on the handcuffs. You need to try harder. Please, come on, Oliver, don't disappoint me. 15 minutes later, she'd recovered, and we were ready for court. 6 hours later, I had the result I wanted. My furious had clearly thrown Chloe off her stride because her prosecution lacked fire, and her summing up was probably the worst I'd heard her deliver. She must have been very aware and distracted, too, but I had a lot more riding on a "not guilty" verdict. In the court car park, Chloe handed me her business card. "You must get in touch, Oliver, so we can finish what we started." Who could refuse an offer like that?
The buzzing of the intercom by my bed awakened me from my siesta. I reached over and pressed the button. "There's a lady here to see you, sir." From the machine came the disembodied voice of my secretary. "I'm a little busy right now, Colette. Ask Val if she could take her in for me." Valerie is my assistant and usually handles most of my visitors. To be honest, I wasn't busy at all. I'd turned into a recluse and was taking an afternoon nap. Colette knew this, so it was unusual for her to disturb me. "The lady says this is a personal and very important matter, sir. What she needs to discuss, she says she can only discuss with you, sir." "Damn it. Tell her she'll have to make an appointment to, I don't know, next week sometime." "The lady says it's urgent and she's adamant, sir." "Oh, hell, all right. I suppose I'd better meet her, escort her to my office in about 5 minutes." I got out of bed, quickly rinsed my face in the bathroom to recover, and then headed across the penthouse to my private office. The window overlooked the sprawling city below. Damn, I hate this damn place. I hate everything about it. God, I think I hate everyone who lives 17 floors below me too, even though they all work for me. Colette entered the office without knocking. She never knocked now, because I was rarely there. Now I'm just the head of this organization. The only reason I was here in my penthouse was because I had nowhere to go and nothing to do. The very pretty young woman Colette was supposed to escort walked past her into her office with an officious look. But I think the sudden grandeur in which she found herself caught her off guard and knocked the wind out of her sails. One could see that she was unaccustomed and uncomfortable with the surroundings in which she suddenly found herself. "Mr. John Crawford?" she asked before Colette could formally introduce herself. "That's me." "My name is June Parsons. I'm from Slough Social Services." I'm not sure, but I think I should have been startled by her statement. "And how can I help you, Miss or Mrs. June Parsons from Slough Social Services?" "Please call me June. We try not to be too formal." Confusion was now read on her face. I guess I wasn't what she expected, and neither was the setting she found herself in. This woman was used to dealing with people on the other end of the financial spectrum, and it seemed she was completely out of place here with me. "Very well, June. You can call me John. What can I do for you?" "Oh, I beg your pardon." "Okay, Colette. You can leave Miss Parsons with me, thank you." Colette, with a curious expression on her face and a wink of her eyes, turned and left the office, closing the door behind her. Well, my visitor was quite beautiful, and gold diggers in the past had used some pretty interesting ways to get me. "Mr. Crawford." "John." "Excuse me, John. I'm from Social Services in Slough." "You've said that many times before. Now please tell me how I can help you." "There is... Where would you like me to start?" she said, looking around the room. Apparently the splendor of the place was not at all what she had expected. "Look, I have a case. The case involves 2 children and a mother who tried to kill herself. It might be best if you read this note. It was found next to the mother." She handed me an envelope with a note, only it was more of a letter than a note. I leaned back in my big swivel chair and opened it. "My dear John." The first line read, and damn it, I knew right away who the letter was from. My memory jumped back 11 years to when my once happy life was suddenly cut short. Hell, as I remember now, I had a hell of a morning. A water main burst on Chiswick High Road, and the whole damn neighborhood came to a standstill as people tried to detour around the blocked road. I was almost an hour and a half late as I tried to sneak into my office unnoticed. For the second time in a week, the drive to work was turning into a bloody nightmare. As I entered my office, June, my secretary, well, she wasn't really my secretary, she was looking after 3 or 4 of our staff, stopped me. "John, Where the hell are you? And why didn't you turn on your cell phone? Oh shit. I must have forgotten to charge the damn thing last night, I thought, and figured it was becoming a habit of mine lately. I was so damn tired and couldn't think straight when I got home in the evenings. Tony Jordan's been looking for you since 9 o'clock. He's very preoccupied with something. You better get your ass over there soon. Damn, goddamn assholes. Just what I needed. That pompous ass on his goddamn horse. Ever since his father retired, that little shit and his brother thought they were God's gift to the goddamn industry. Truth is, he had no idea how to negotiate a contract or make clients happy. I wondered who the little bastard had upset now. Oh, John, thank God you showed up. I've been trying to track you down all morning. You know, you really need to do something with your time, Tony Jordan said as I walked into his office. Well, if you hadn't moved that bleeding office from Slough to goddamn Chiswick, I wouldn't have to sit in bleeding traffic every bloody morning and evening, you little Trump asshole, ran through my head. I wondered why the hell I didn't have the nerve to say that to the little shit. But that's what we all think, isn't it? Sorry, Tony, there's a burst water main in the high road. Well, I got here in time. Of course you made it in time, you little shit. You've got an expensive city apartment, paid for by the company, and only a couple blocks away, that you live in during rainy week. With that little brownie, your missus doesn't know about to keep you warm at night. Anyway, something went wrong with Johnson's work. They're late with the delivery again. I need you to fly down there and reason with Johnson's board of directors. You know, fuel the fire. They're threatening again to take their contract elsewhere. If that happens, heads will roll. Not just here, but at the plant. You've sweet-talked Johnson before. I'm sure you can do it again. Why don't you go yourself? I thought. Since you're going there, take another pile of shit with you, your brother Robert. The two of you are going to bring the damn company down. If your old man knew how you two have screwed things up around here, he'd be rolling over in his grave. But we do think about these things, don't we? I'd really like to think of a good reason why I don't say them. But if I did, I'd be on the street, wouldn't I? I'll call Simon Johnson. I'm sure he'll come around. We've been doing business with him for years. No, you'll take the 12 o'clock flight there. Old man Johnson has retired, and his nephew Paul Johnson has taken over as chairman of the company. Neither Robert nor I can go. We both have a very busy calendar this week. A flight at 12 o'clock? Damn, there's no way I can make it in time. I have to get home and pack first. And besides, I have to take Sally to the theater tonight. She's been talking me into taking her for months now. Well, you'll have to take her some other time. Don't worry, the company will reimburse you for the cost of the tickets. The play ends Saturday night. Sally has been driving me crazy for weeks to take her along. But I've been so busy settling things with Carter's contract that I didn't get home until late at night to go. I decided that now that Carter's contract was signed and there would be no problems, my evenings would be free at least for a few weeks. I know that for the last night, all the tickets are sold out. Tonight was the only day we were able to get seats for. If I go to New York, I won't be back until Friday. Sally will be furious. Then she'll have to go with a friend or something, won't she? Sally knows as well as anyone that the company needs the Johnson job. It's nearly half our turnover. Better call her at the factory, get her to go home and pack you a bag. You won't make it home from here and back to the airport in time. Run along, we can't afford for you to miss your flight. Cheeky little shit, thought I as I walked out of his office. I started working for Henry Jordan right out of college. When I came to work for him, it was a very small concern. Jordan and Sons Machine Tools. A few years ago, Henry Jordan took the top spot. Maggie Thatcher said that industry had to stand on its own 2 feet, and banks started demanding overdrafts from companies. Deprived of working capital, British engineering firms began to close down en masse. Henry Jordan was one of those vultures who bought up all the unneeded equipment and machines. He rebuilt them in his own small factory and sold them at a ridiculous profit to companies all over the developing world. Henry Jordan was a typical conservative to the core. My guess is that quite a bit of the profits somehow disappeared into offshore accounts. A good Tory shouldn't pay too much tax, should he? Once there were fewer bankruptcies, Henry Jordan changed the way the company operated. He became an agent for companies who wanted to sell machine tools to Europe. It's very simple. Machine tools were brought into the country in pieces, then assembled and shipped anywhere in the EEC. The company was doing well until two brothers were old enough to join the firm. Unfortunately, Henry's two sons, who were both at university, tried to run things on a just-in-time basis. This was great on the production line, but didn't leave time to deal with the problems that often arose in our business. Parts coming in from all over the world could be delayed for 1,001 reasons. Fortunately, most of our customers were aware of these problems. But if the brothers had just left a few days' grace when they specified delivery dates, we wouldn't have had half the problems we had. It always seemed obvious to me. Tell a customer they can get the product in 3 weeks, and then tell them you can deliver it 5 days earlier. They'll be happy. Tell them you can have it in 2 weeks, then deliver it a week later. Shit flies. And never promise something you can't deliver. I couldn't understand why Tony was insisting I fly to New York. The brothers had the last contract with Johnson's, and they were the ones who were supposed to clean up the mess. Yeah, but I knew how it would look to the board of directors if things went wrong. I was the person who had to take charge of the case. Back in my office, I called Sally's office at the factory in Slough. Yes, Sally worked for Jordan and Son too. That's exactly what Tony was implying. It's not just my head that's going to spin, it's Sally's too. Sally and I met when she joined the typing pool years ago. A typing pool, so you'll know what time I'm talking about. We seemed to get along pretty well from the beginning. But it wasn't until we went to the company Christmas party that year that we met. You know how it is. Everyone kisses under the mistletoe, and when I kissed Sally, I don't know exactly what happened, but eventually someone asked us if we were going to move as they wanted to take their turn. Sally and I didn't discuss it or anything. From that kiss on, we became each other's friends. I think we both ran around like crazy buying each other Christmas presents, and I joined her and her family for Christmas dinner. I think it caused some confusion, as I'm sure they were expecting some other guy. But no one said anything. We went out together on New Year's Eve and woke up together in my bed on New Year's Day. It was our first time together. Unfortunately, I have to admit that I don't remember much about it. I do remember the night of January 1st. Sally never came home, and 4 months later we were married. The next 10 years were the happiest of my life when I was home. My life at work was great until Henry's twin boys graduated and came to work for the firm. Before they joined the company, I was Henry's number 2, his assistant in all things above and below ground. The arrival of the boys meant a change. Henry wasn't a bad old fuddy-duddy. At first, he didn't put his boys above me in the company hierarchy, but they both seemed to take offense to that. They were nice enough to me, but I knew they didn't like me having a higher position in their company. Henry Jordan took the company to the stock market and made a bloody killing on it. That was the only time he really upset me. I thought he'd point at least a few stocks in my direction, but he didn't. Another thing that didn't happen was that I wasn't made a director. Both brothers got on the board and I didn't. Then Henry had a bloody heart attack. At the hospital, he asked me to look after the boys. Some hope, Henry, I thought. If you'd give me some stock and put me on the board of directors, I could have some influence over them. Of course, I never told him that. It was clear to me that he was leaving. Henry retired immediately and passed away 3 months later. As soon as the lid of his coffin was closed, the boys began to make some changes. None of them seemed successful, but there wasn't much I could do about it. They rented new offices in Chiswick, and most of the receptionists and salesmen moved there. Tony took over the department, while Robert took over the running of the factory completely. In doing so, he inherited Sally as his secretary. She was assistant to the factory manager for a while, but the manager didn't stay long because Robert was always taking care of his business. I can't say I was thrilled that Sally was working for Robert Jordan. I couldn't figure out what the big deal was, but I never liked the way one of the brothers looked at her. Come on, maybe it was jealousy, or maybe I just didn't like either of the brothers. But I felt something. Sally was 5 years older than both boys, but she was a fine woman, even if I thought so myself. It turned out that Sally got along very well with Robert. Too well even for my taste. No, I didn't think anything untoward was going on. But since I really didn't like the boys, I sometimes made remarks about them. Sally would stand up for them, and there it was, a recipe for trouble. Truth be told, when the company got busier and I was running all over the damn place to please clients and get new contracts, I think Robert started seeing Sally more often than I did. So she saw his side of any problem long before it came down on me. Okay, back to the Johnson contract and my urgent flight to the US. I called Sally to give her the good news. I think they must have heard her reaction on the Chelsea soccer field. I know she stunned me. But you're taking me to the play tonight. You promised. Why the hell did you volunteer to go to New York? That was another problem I had. Whenever I was asked to go somewhere, Sally somehow got it into her head that it was my own decision. I could never understand why she thought I was volunteering to go on these damn trips. But it was obvious from our conversations on the subject that she was sure I was doing it. I didn't volunteer, Sally. Tony just ordered me to go. Of course, you know what the problem is with the Johnson contract supplies. Didn't Robert tell you? There are always problems these days. But why do you always have to volunteer to solve them? Especially when we have to go to a play tonight. I'm getting tired of your attitude toward me lately. What about my play? You know what I mean? I had just told her I was being sent to New York, and she still insisted that I had volunteered to go. I'm afraid it pissed me off that she wasn't really listening to what I was saying. Honestly, Sally, I don't give a damn about the damn play. Our jobs, yours and mine, are on the line, and if I can't appease Johnson's damn board, the company's going to be up the damn creek with no paddle and no orders. And don't blame me for the fact that your men in the plant can't produce on time. And that's the problem with separating the two parts of the company. It's turned into a they are us culture. Unfortunately, I was with us, and Sally was with them. An even bigger recipe for disaster. Now please go home, pack a bloody bag for me, and then meet me at the check-in desk at Heathrow at 11. Please. And there was silence on the other end of the phone for a few moments, and then Sally said in a very calm voice, "You'll get your bloody bag and probably a few other things you didn't bargain for. I'm not your bloody whore, you know." The line cut off. Why had I done that? Why had I yelled at Sally, and why had she yelled at me? Hell, I knew I should have apologized to her when she picked me up at the airport. But that hadn't happened. I waited at check-in at 11 o'clock, but Sally was nowhere to be seen. 10 o'clock in the evening passed, and she was still gone. The girl was about to close the counter when Sally appeared. She strolled through the departure lounge like I had all the time in the world. "Damn it, Sally, what took you so long?" Clearly with a harsh tone in her voice, as I was really worried I was going to miss my flight. But then I realized that it wasn't Sally's or my fault that we had a fight. It wasn't either of us' fault that she was disappointed with the play that night, and we shouldn't have parted ways while being angry with each other. "I'm sorry, Sally. I'm just so worried about this damn trip." I wanted to kiss her, but she pulled away from me. "We don't have time for that sort of thing. You have to hurry and save your precious contract." Then I heard the girl at the front desk say, "You must turn in your bag now, Mr. Parsons, or it won't make your flight." I turned to the girl and went through the check-in formalities. When I turned back to Sally again, she was gone. "How soon will the flight be announced?" I asked the girl. "Probably about half an hour or so, but I would advise you not to leave the departure area." I ran in the direction from which Sally had appeared. But Sally was apparently leaving much faster than she came. At the end of the concourse was the entrance to a covered bridge that led to a short-term parking lot. I was halfway across the bridge when out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a bright yellow Lamborghini pulling out of the parking lot onto the lower level. Through the windshield on the passenger side, I could make out Sally's coat. I knew the little asshole behind the wheel, though I couldn't see him. Robert Jordan didn't let anyone drive his damn status symbol but himself. God, I was so pissed. Robert Jordan was so busy he couldn't go to New York, but he had time to entertain my wife. God, I was pissed as hell when I got back to the terminal building. Oddly enough, I went into a bar and ordered a drink. After sitting there for 20 minutes or so, my flight was announced and I moved to the departure lounge. I spent most of the flight scrutinizing the contracts as closely as I could, looking for the loopholes Henry always put in them that gave us a little leeway on delivery dates and the like. But the guys were already working on the latest contracts, and most of those subtle loopholes had been closed. On arrival at JFK Airport, I was met by Paul Johnson himself, along with his assistant Petra, whom he had apparently inherited from his uncle, and a small entourage of pro people. I had met this guy a few times in the past, albeit a bit misnamed, but Paul always seemed very young next to me, like the Jordan brothers. In fact, I was only 5 or so years before them. Back in the day, Simon Johnson usually talked the most, and Paul was one of those who nodded enthusiastically in agreement at everything Simon said, and of course laughed at his jokes. I was alarmed by Paul's overly enthusiastic greeting. What made me even more wary was that he had a whole bunch of his underlings with him, carrying my bags and laptop to the waiting limo. "We're putting you up in a company suite in WA," Paul said. AKJ had hoped to see you on this trip, but the timing is unfortunate. He's still on a round-the-world trip. He said to tell you that he would find you when the ship docks at Southampton. I remember thinking that this was a very strange wish from Simon Johnson. Yes, I always got on with the old man. Henry Jordan and I met him many times over the years that we worked with his company. But I never considered our friendship to be anything other than a purely business relationship. Now that he's retired, why on earth would he want to see me? For years, Henry Jordan always stayed at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. But when I myself came to New York, I usually stayed in places less extravagant. But Paul had told me that this room was a company room, so I figured it just happened to be vacant. I couldn't imagine the Jordan brothers splurging on a room for me. After dropping me off at the WA, Paul said he would send Petra to pick me up for dinner around 7 o'clock. Then he and his little entourage departed. Jesus, this trip was getting more confusing by the bloody minute. In theory, I should have taken, or at least asked Paul Johnson to have dinner with me. By then, it was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon local time. I wondered if Sally had gone to the play herself or not. After all, she had the tickets. I dialed our home number. As I expected, there was no answer. Thinking that it was about 9 p.m. in London, I sent a message to her cell phone asking if she liked the play and who she went with. When Petra came to pick me up, she caught me talking on the phone again. I didn't get a reply to my message to Sally and thought she must be home by now. But the home phone was again unanswered. This time, I left a message on the answering machine, saying I was going to dinner and would call her the next day. As I was about to leave the room, Petra snatched the briefcase from my hands and returned it to the chair from which I had taken it. "We're having a purely social evening tonight, John. Paul would like you to meet his family. He said it's a shame you didn't bring your wife." "Petra, what's all this about?" I asked as soon as we got into the car. I could see that Petra was contemplating how to answer my question, and it took a few moments before she answered. "Paul just thinks that since you two do so much business with each other, you should both get to know each other better. And he wants you to get to know everyone on the Johnson Board of Directors as well." None of this made any sense to me until I came to the realization that perhaps I was about to be poached from Jordan and Son to Johnson and Associates. I could think of no other explanation for the strange behavior of everyone present. The dinner went splendidly, with a large number of Johnson and Associates board members and their spouses in attendance. Afterward, we went to a late-night establishment where some of the party members were dancing. I didn't venture out onto the dance floor as I was feeling the time zone shift. I had been up for 5 or so hours longer than everyone else. As the evening went on, however, I became more and more convinced that my headhunting idea must be the right one. All the board members went out of their way to talk to me and make me feel at home. Petra stuck to me like glue, acting like she was my assistant. You know what I mean? Whenever someone approached me, she would whisper who he or she was and tell me everything I needed to know about them. When I got back to my room, it was about 2 in the morning New York time and about 7 in the morning at home. There were no messages on my cell phone, and judging by the phone, Sally hadn't left me any messages either. I considered calling her, but decided it was a little early to do so since she had left late the night before. At 11 a.m., I was awakened from my dead man's slumber by the noisy arrival of breakfast, followed by the now ubiquitous Petra. She was again acting as my assistant. At 12 o'clock, you have a meeting with the full board. It won't take long, and after that, Paul would like you to join him for a round of golf. Oh, you do play, don't you? Of course I do. I remember you and Henry playing SJ. Anyway, you'll be flying to SJ's estate from the helipad on the roof of the building right after the meeting. Oh, and Paul wanted to know how much of a hurry you're in to get back to London. Well, that depends on what Paul and the board have to say about our late deliveries. Oh, I think they'll be pleased no matter what you say. After all, you are… Well, anyway, they know and trust you. Now you'd better hurry up or you'll be late for the meeting. Petra suddenly lost her usual self-confidence. For a moment, she seemed unusually agitated, and just as suddenly she hurried out of the room. Or at least to get rid of my presence for a while. To be honest, I didn't follow what Petra was saying too closely, for I was anxious to call Sally. I called her office at the factory, but the switchboard intercepted my call. The girl explained that Sally was out of the office that day. Fortunately, as it turned out, the receptionist was a temp and didn't recognize my voice. The stupid bitch didn't even ask who I was. When I asked if she knew why Sally was out of the office, she said she didn't know. I don't know why, maybe it was a sixth sense. But something made me ask her to put me through to Robert Jordan. She told me that he wasn't in the office that day either. Completely annoyed, I called his home number, but again there was no answer. So I called Sally's cell phone and found it turned off. Robert's cell phone was also turned off. Completely exhausted, I called Tony Jordan at the Chiswick office. When he got on the line, I demanded to know where the hell Robert was. I told Tony that there was something in the contract that I needed Robert to clarify for me. It seemed to me that Tony thought a little longer than necessary before answering. Oh, I think Robert's gone to Brighton. He's meeting with the directors of Carter's Industries today. I think he said he was going to take Sally with him to take notes. You know what Tony's memory is like. Bad choice, you lying little asshole. That was the same damn contract I closed last week. All signed, sealed, and delivered. What kind of bullshit are you trying to slip me? Again, it was a thought, not a statement. After Tony asked me how things were going, I told him that I would probably have to stick around for a couple days to get them calmed down. Then, once I had finished talking to Tony, I called Monty Carter's secretary in Brighton. As I expected, she confirmed that there were no meetings scheduled that day between Robert and her boss. Moreover, she couldn't recall them ever meeting at all. Petra reappeared and urged me to shower and dress for the conference as soon as possible. I shoved the remains of my breakfast down my throat and rushed to the shower. We were a little late, but no one seemed to notice. An incredible round of introductions began, followed by a tour of the offices. We didn't get to the conference room until almost 1 p.m. I have to say that my negotiations really were a complete farce. Everyone was agreeing with everything I was saying, and they seemed more concerned with whether I was upset about anything. I realized that everyone agreed with me that the Jordan brothers were a couple of jerks and a waste of space. But it wasn't really put into words. Convinced by then that they were going to make me an offer I couldn't refuse, I was somewhat surprised when the offer never came. When the meeting was over, Paul and I and a few other directors went up to the roof to board the helicopter. Petra, as usual, joined us. She asked when I wanted to return to England and arranged a flight for later in the day. At the golf course, I called my secretary in Chiswick on my cell phone and said I would stay for a few days. Whatever was going on, I wanted everyone to believe that I would be out of the country for a few more days. Petra must have heard my conversation. Pardon my curiosity, John, but is something wrong? I have to ask because I couldn't help but notice that every time you call England, you are troubled about something, she asked in a concerned tone. I'm not sure, but I think something is wrong there. though I'm afraid it's personal. Have we known each other a long time, John? Is there anything I can do to help? You know I have a knack for discretion. Well, you could help me. It would be helpful if no one knew I was flying home tonight. No one in England, that is. If what I fear is going on, I'd like to try to catch them in the act. Oh dear, you don't think your wife is... I don't know, Petra, but we had a fight before I left, and she didn't show up where I thought she was supposed to be when I tried to call her. I also can't reach her on the phone. Maybe she's still annoyed with me, but there's a man I can't reach either, and someone else is telling me wrong. There has to be some reason. Oh, now I see why you're in a hurry to get back. Look, if anyone from England tries to call you, I'll transfer them to me. I'm the only one besides Paul who knows you're flying this evening anyway. All of Paul's calls go through me, so I'll hold anyone who tries to contact you. You'll be able to call them back on your cell phone, and they'll have no idea where you are. Thank you, Petra. Now I guess I better get back to the game. While I was talking to Petra, I noticed Paul starting to approach us. I stepped farther away to make a phone call. What confused me was that out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Petra make a small gesture with her hand when she saw Paul start to move in our direction. Paul immediately changed direction and got into a conversation with the other two players. After finishing the game, we went to SJ's mansion for dinner where I again met SJ's daughter, Beatrice. Once again, I felt like something was wrong. I had known B for years, but that day she looked awkward around me. I couldn't figure out what was wrong, but I had a feeling that these people knew something that I didn't. I began to wonder if I had made a mistake in telling Petra about my suspicions. At the end of the day, we returned to the company headquarters by helicopter. Petra then escorted me to the airport. She arranged for someone to pick up my gear from WA. The flight back to Heathrow went without incident until I landed. A steward met me in the arrivals hall, told me there was an urgent phone call for me, and led me to the service phone. John, this is Petra. Last night after you left, we all got calls last night. Your wife called, and I told her you were in conference with Paul. Then both Johns called, but separately, and I told them the same thing. Then your wife called again and asked if I knew when you were coming home. I told her I had booked you on a Saturday evening flight. Would that be all right with you? Thank you, Petra, that will be fine. I'll call them from my cell phone later and tell them the same story. Thanks for your help. Stay in touch, John. I'll let you know if any of them call here again. So, my loving wife reappeared and showed signs of concern about where I was. I wondered why she was suddenly so concerned about me. I booked a room at the Novotel Hotel near the airport and discovered that Hertz had already delivered the car I had booked in New York. I, or rather the company, had a Hertz account, so it was the easiest choice, but the car was privately ordered for me. Reluctantly, I drove past my house. Sally's car was parked in the driveway, and the house was plunged into darkness. This was to be expected, for it was a little after 4 in the morning. From the phone booth at the corner of our driveway, I called the house phone. There was no answer, and the answering machine picked up. I rang 4 times in succession, and when she didn't answer any of them, I decided it was safe to assume that Sally was out of the house. Leaving the car in place, I walked up to the house and quietly entered. A quick inspection of the house showed it to be deserted. What to do now? I asked myself. The best idea I could think of was to sit down and wait for Sally to return. I made myself some coffee and settled down in the living room. I was counting on the coffee to keep me awake, but it didn't. I was awakened by the noisy exhaust of the Lamborghini, which sounded just before 8 o'clock. Through the window, I watched Sally and Robert get out of the yellow car and approach the house. Come on in, Bobby. I don't need much time to shower and change. Go to the kitchen and make some coffee. I need something to clear my head. Surprisingly, none of them noticed me sitting in the living room, even though the door was wide open. I guess some people don't see what they don't expect to see. Sally ran up the stairs and Robert went into the kitchen. I could hear him going through all the cupboards. Then he came out and, running up the stairs, turned to Sally. Where do you keep the coffee percolator, Sal? On the side, she answered him. Well, I can't find it, he retorted, walking up to her. I heard Sally coming down the stairs. "Oh, you men are useless if you don't have a good woman around to look after you," she said as she entered the kitchen. Funny, he's supposed to be at the side. I don't think I left it in Lou. Oh my God, what are you doing here? Sally, unable to find the coffee percolator in the kitchen, came into the living room looking for it and finally spotted me. She was standing there in a tight bra and thong, neither of which, I might add, I'd never seen before. "Oh, I was just sitting here waiting for my faithful wife to return. Now I think I'm going to sink my teeth into that nasty little asshole's throat," I said, getting up from my chair. Both Robert and Sally seemed glued to the seat in shock for a moment, for they were both sure that I was still in the United States. Then Robert came to his senses and tried to escape. Unfortunately for him, our front door had a rather unusual and complicated night latch. The damn lever on it turned the wrong way. The more he pulled and tugged on it, the more panic gripped him. I pinned him against the door and literally beat the shit out of him. I don't think the little jerk even knew how to defend himself. Sally was yelling at me that all is not what it seems and trying to pull me away from Robert. I don't think I knocked him half as much as I would have liked. I think some would have taken the opportunity to beat the shit out of him, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Turning the latch in the right direction, I opened the door and pushed him outside. Then, without hesitation, I grabbed Sally and pushed her outside as well. Slamming the door shut, I went back into the living room, but this time headed for the liquor cabinet. Sally knocked on the door, and a little while later rang the doorbell. Sally called through the mailbox, once again stating that all was not as it seemed and begging me to let her back in. I was determined that I wasn't going to get into an altercation with her and ignored her. By then, some of the neighbors were already interested in our little cabaret. I could see them watching from their front doors and gardens. Sally must have thought I was back in the living room, for she changed her aim and started banging on one of the living room windows, still yelling for me to let her in. Unfortunately for her, she apparently hit the window too hard. Just as the police arrived, the window glass shattered and Sally cut her hand badly on the shards. It seemed like only a few moments passed before the paramedics and ambulance arrived. I guess the police called them, and I didn't. Then a policeman knocked on the door. I watched him talk to Sally and Robert before he did. "Good morning, sir. Would you like to tell me your side of this little debauch?" he asked. "I caught my wife with her ass. Do I need to say anything else?" "Not really, sir, but the man says you hit him." "Hit him? Wouldn't you have hit him? He was in my house." You didn't hit your wife?" "Hell no, I didn't. I just helped her out the door so she could be with her boyfriend. I thought I was being quite magnanimous." The other officer, who was still talking to Sally and Robert, walked over and shook his head in the first officer's direction. "He doesn't want to take her anywhere, and the lady says there was no violence toward her." He then turned to me. "Your wife has a nasty wound on her arm, sir. The medic says she'll need some stitches, so she'll be taken to the trauma center. But she'll need some clothes. Will you take her there?" "No way in hell I'm taking her. That's her blood problem, not mine. Let her asshole friend buy her new clothes. He's got plenty of money." My attention was caught by the rumble of the Lamborghini pulling away following the ambulance. "Oh, looks like she decided to go without. Now, if you'll excuse me, officers, I need to call the window department and my lawyer." The cops left, muttering something about hoping they wouldn't be called later in the day. I called the window men, and a few minutes later, a man came in to replace the broken glass. He tried to make small talk while he worked, but soon realized I wasn't in the mood for conversation. My attorney transferred me to a colleague of his who handled divorces at their firm. She told me she would set things in motion, but couldn't do much until we figured out who was going to advocate on Sally's behalf. It all depended on how Sally wanted to play it out. I noticed that the police drove by several times during the morning while I was putting all of Sally's clothes that I had placed in the garbage cans in the garage. There must have been some sort of collusion between the police and Sally. They must have informed Sally that I had put her stuff in the garage. Because around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, another police car pulled up to the house, this time with only one officer in it. He didn't bother to get out. A little later, a Ford Transit van, driven by one of the guys from the plant, came down the driveway and backed into my driveway. Using the remote control, I opened the garage shutters. It was clear to me what they had come for. Sally, whose arm was now in a sling, came out of the passenger door along with one of the girls from the office. While the guy and girl were loading Sally's stuff into the van, I heard Sally trying to open the service door between the garage and the kitchen. Finding it locked, she walked over and rang the front doorbell. John? John, I need to talk to you. You've got it all wrong. Nothing happened between me and Robert. John, can you hear me? I know you're in there. Talk to me, John, please. Let's talk about this, please. You're making a terrible mistake, Sally called through the mailbox. I opened the door, but before she could say anything, I shoved her purse in her hands and slammed it shut again. I had already taken the credit cards and house keys out of it. I watched Sally walk over and talk to the policeman who had gotten out of his car. He kept shrugging his shoulders and shaking his head. After a while, with a resigned expression on his face, he pointed to a spot on the ground where I assume he told Sally and her friends to wait. Then he walked over and knocked on the door. Your wife wants to speak to you, sir. And you know you can't keep her out of the matrimonial home, he said when I opened. You can tell her we have nothing to discuss. The house is already up for sale because she has decided that it is no longer our marital home. If it was, she would have been in it last night when I got home instead of having fun with her boyfriend elsewhere, wouldn't she? Tell her to have her lawyer contact mine, will you? She knows who mine are. The officer returned to the house where he had a brief but very animated conversation with Sally and her friends. Sally then apparently fell into the arms of her two friends who helped her back into the van. Then they drove off. The policeman stood shaking his head as he watched the garage door slowly close. Shrugging to one of the neighbors watching the pantomime, he got into his car and drove away. An hour or so later, Petra called me. I told her about the day's events and she said she was sorry. She asked what I intended to do, and I told her that I was divorcing Sally and of course would no longer be able to work at Jordan's. Petra told me that I should keep in touch with her and made me promise to do so. She also mentioned that Simon Johnson was going to call me and told me that I should stay in touch so that he could find me. Paul had told me that once before. I wondered what was so important about this visit from Simon Johnson. It was past midnight when I got back to the Novator. There was no way I could go back to sleep in that house. There were too many memories in it. After breakfast the next morning, I called my secretary June and asked if Tony was around. She said he wouldn't be in the office that day and asked what the hell was going on. Well, I told her straight up. June was very upset by the news. I could have sworn she was crying when I told her. She informed me that Tony had told her that I would probably resign when I showed up at the office again. She was under the impression that he had not left the office that day so that he would not be there when I showed up. Tony's absence struck me as odd. I would have thought that after I'd punched his brother in the face, he'd be more than happy to fire me. After all, Robert is one of the company's directors, and there was no love lost between us. None of it made any sense. None of it made any sense. First, my trip to New York. Tony had insisted that I go, but when I arrived, all of Johnson's people seemed surprised that I had come. Yes, there were a few late deliveries, but it wasn't like they were climbing the wall over them. And then there's Robert going off on Sally. Yeah, she's a good-looking woman. But Robert was a bit of a boy when it came to women, and always seemed to have some little baby bird in his arms. Sally was at least 5 years older than him, and almost 10 years older than his usual tarts. I don't know. I guess they could have fallen in love. They'd spent most of their working lives together after all. But somehow I doubted Robert would have gone for it. I went into the office to get my personal belongings. I took the opportunity to wipe the hard drive on both company computers and the laptop I carried with me, but not before copying the contents of the hard drives to zip drives. I took my resignation letter, which June had prepared for me, to the HR person. While I stood and waited, he directed that my final paycheck and bonuses be immediately deposited into my bank account. The accounting department was somewhat reluctant at first, but only until they realized exactly who was retiring. I think almost all the employees either helped me carry my stuff to my rental car or came out to wave goodbye to me. I left the company car in the garage, securely locked up inside the house. I wanted to make sure I got everything I was owed before I let them return the car. That was the end of it. I lived in the Novator for a week or so before I found a condo I liked. The house sold very quickly. It was in a good neighborhood, and I priced it for a quick sale. Working? Well, I decided to take a few months off and consider my next steps. To be honest, I was still waiting for Johnson's to make me an offer, and I didn't want to commit myself too quickly elsewhere. Sally? I'd seen her a couple times. Both times we had heated arguments. Correction. On both occasions I called her a little whore, and she responded in kind. Civil conversations between us seemed impossible. I was surprised she didn't move in with Robert right away. She didn't move in with him until a few months after I kicked her out of the house. Whose apartment she was living in during that time, I don't know. But the guy I hired to look after her said she moved in with Robert right after our first major fight with the lawyers. They almost had to call the cops. She probably realized at that meeting that there was no way we were getting back together. Our second verbal battle was when we were signing the divorce papers. Sally, looking very strange, was sitting at the table before I entered the room. She was wearing a large winter coat and was sitting rather oddly. The lawyer and I sat across from each other while the details of the agreement were read out. Then Sally signed the papers. They were placed in front of me, and as I was about to sign, Sally asked, "John, are you really sure you want to do this? There are some things you really need." "Did you hear some crooked lying slut say something, Sandra?" I asked my lawyer. Sally jumped on me, calling me all kinds of names, so I quickly signed the forms and left the room without adding another word. Like I said, I didn't need or want to get into an altercation with her. A few weeks passed, maybe a month or so after the divorce became final, and Petra called me to let me know that Simon Johnson was coming to Southampton for the weekend. I arranged to meet him at a hotel in the city. After the awkward formalities were sorted out, Simon and his wife chatted with me for some more time about their cruise. Once again, I got the feeling he was up to something. Look, this guy was just a customer I had known for years, but now he was acting like a long-lost friend. We expressed our condolences about Henry's death, and he said he was sorry to hear about what happened between me and Sally. And then he said he was sorry he couldn't have acted sooner, but he had to respect Henry's wishes. That statement suggested to me that he just didn't know what to do. It was all over when Bea walked into the room. She said hello to me, gave me a hug and a kiss on the cheek as usual. She then handed Simon the briefcase she was carrying in her hands. Bea and Simon's wife then left the room before he opened it. "So, John, let's get down to business. Tell me, what did you think when Henry floated the company and didn't give you a single share?" he suddenly asked. I really didn't know what to answer. "Well, it was his company, and he could do whatever he wanted with his money," I said. "But you helped him set it up. From what I know about Henry, I'll bet you took more than one risk for him." I didn't bother to answer. I figured he'd get to the point soon enough. "Did you know that Henry owned a significant share of Johnson's through offshore holding companies? And those same companies own a significant stake in Jordan." This was news to me, but I still decided it was best to remain silent and listen to what Simon had to say. "Tell me, what did Henry say to you when he retired? He knew he didn't have long to live." "He asked me to try to keep his boys under control. But since I wasn't on the board of directors, there was little chance of that happening." "Yes, I'm sorry to have to tell you, but he did it on purpose. He figured the boys would bankrupt the company within a year or so, and he didn't want your name on the books. He thought they'd try to pin the blame on you. You do know that if a company goes bankrupt because of mismanagement of funds, directors can be banned from holding other positions, don't you?" Anyway, he decided that the boys would quickly put the company out of business. Now, according to these papers, you are the major shareholder of these holding companies. In fact, you own them. Simon placed a stack of papers on the table. "And these papers contain the details of all of Henry's bank accounts. I was supposed to keep all of these until Jordan and Son went bust. But after what your brother did to you, I think you'd better get them now. You know that under the terms of your father's will, the brothers couldn't fire you, don't you? Ah, I see they didn't. I guess those bastards set you and Sally up to resign. He leaned back in his chair and looked at me. You know, John, you're a very rich man now, even though all your money is in offshore accounts, so you need to figure out how to get it back into the country legally. I can show you some tricks. I have some very resourceful accountants. My head was spinning. He had just told me that Robert Jordan had seduced Sally and ruined my life for no other reason than to kick me out of the firm. But why? You seem angry, John, and I don't blame you. Look, Henry was never sure if the boys were really his. Martha had a habit of having affairs while Henry wasn't working. He had DNA testing done a few years ago and, for a while, generally believed he was their father, even though they weren't really his sons. But he came to the conclusion that they knew he wasn't their real father. And he learned that they had said some very unpleasant things about him behind his back. Henry always said you were more than a son to him, so he figured you would have all his money. He figured the boys would break up the firm. I think he wanted them to go bankrupt and be penniless, as I suppose you did. But what about the Jordan employees? They'll all lose their jobs. Not if some big American company takes over. Now, do you understand Henry's little game, John? Johnson's will cancel its contracts with Jordan's within the next week or so. And the next day, one or two offshore shareholders will dump a bunch of Jordan's stock on the London stock market. That should kill the share price. A hint will be made to the right bank directors, and they will take out loans to the company. Then a consortium will step in and buy back what's left of the company from the banks. I'll let you guess who will be at the head of that consortium and become the major shareholder, but no one will know about it. You will, of course, renegotiate your contracts with Johnson's. Perhaps in time, you will invite me to join your board of directors. Then, as a result of the merger of Johnson's and Jordan's, you will also join Johnson's board of directors. What do you think of all this, John? I don't understand. Why didn't Henry leave the company to me from the beginning? And you would have fought their probate claims for the next 20 years. For the last few years, you've been with Henry almost every day of his working life. You know, Henry was always a bit eccentric. He was sure that the family would claim your undue influence over him. They were sure he had money stashed away somewhere overseas. They've spent a lot of money over the past few years tracking it down. That's why Henry put it all in my care. Anyone who checks where your money came from will find that it came from me. And since I'm no longer associated with Johnson & Associates, they can't accuse us of insider trading. And of course, I've been on that damn ship for the last 6 months. Next chapter. So that's it. I am now chairman of the board of Simon Johnson Associates. I leave Paul to run the American branch and keep an eye on what's going on in Europe. Both the Jordan brothers went bankrupt and are banned from being directors of any company for 10 years. They have tried to get things going a couple of times, but I have been keeping a close eye on them. Surprisingly, in my opinion, Robert married Sally. I'm not sure, but I think he thought Sally would get her hands on some of the money that I'm sure he suspected would flow to me. But since they officially came into my possession after Sally and I divorced, he didn't stand a chance. And as soon as they were married, I filed a petition with the court to stop paying alimony. They never got anything from me after that. The marriage didn't last more than a year. I'll be honest, I felt sorry for the twins that Sally had with him. They must have gathered at the office for fun after I kicked her out, since the guy I watched Sally from said they rarely met in the evenings. I doubted the bastard even paid her child support after he dumped her. You know, things like that don't get out of my head, and I wondered how many years Robert had entertained Sally at his desk. But she must have gotten pregnant pretty soon after we broke up. I'd seen her pushing a baby carriage on the Slough High Road just a year after I'd kicked her out. The last I heard of Robert was that he lived somewhere in southern Spain, with the drug squad on his case. Southern Spain, Morocco, not far for a speedboat. I guess that's how Robert's mind worked. Well, anyway, that's why I got the police on the trail. As for Tony, apparently he drives buses around London. Not the nicest place to drive a bus. His wife divorced him after she got information about his little flatmate, Who supplied her with that information is impossible to guess. And of course, Tony has his mother Martha living with him. Do I feel any guilt about Martha losing her income from Jordan and Son? Actually, the question should be, did Martha feel any guilt for running after Henry? You reap what you sow, you reap what you reap. Sally, last I heard, was living in a council apartment in Slough. Living off the public purse, I suppose. I don't know, maybe she's moonlighting on the side. Sorry, that was inappropriate, but that's how I feel. Things went pretty quickly once we got started. Paul and I worked well together. We were both trained by experts. Henry Jordan trained me, and Simon Johnson trained Paul. Over the next few years, we absorbed other companies wholesale. The merger of the two companies turned us into a large multinational corporation. Paul and I now stepped back a bit and left it to the minions to do most of the worrying. Simon Johnson and his wife have settled in England. He has a beautiful estate next to mine. His daughter, Bea, and I are sort of spending time together. No, we're not getting married and we don't plan to. We've both been down that road once before. Bea is on the board of directors along with Paul, myself, and of course Petra. We all get along very well. Don't we, Petra? What did you expect? Paul's wife died in a traffic accident a few years ago. After much persuasion, he married Petra. Paul claims she only married him because she was tired of waiting for me to propose. You may ask why I live in this penthouse alone. Well, there's something missing in my life, and there has been since, when. I'm kind of living day to day. If an opportunity comes up to make a fortune in the market, I'll take it. But there's gotta be more to life than making money. Next chapter. So the social worker hands me a letter from Sally. I read it quickly and then hit the intercom button on my desk. Colette, see if Beatrice is in the building and ask her to get here as soon as possible. Yes, sir. I think she's in her office. I've seen her before and haven't seen her come out again. A few minutes later, Bea was at my door. When she entered the room, I silently held out the letter to her. Upon reading it, Bea took several deep breaths, which told me that its contents had infuriated her. Evil, vindictive little bitch. Did you have any thoughts at all? Not the slightest. What are you going to do? Come on, Bea. I have no choice in the matter. Turning my attention to June Parsons, I asked, what hospital is Sally in? At Slough General. And what's the prognosis, do you know? When I was there last night, they didn't know. She's on a whole cocktail of medications, pretty much everything she had in the house. She's been pumped out, but they have no idea how long she's been there. The doctor told me it'll be a while before they have any idea. And the children? I handed them over to their foster mom last night. She's going to look after them today. I thought I'd ask what you wanted to do. Oh, I have to pick up that note. If she doesn't make it, the coroner will want to see her. No problem. Make a copy for me, Bea, and give the original to Miss Parsons. Colette, put me through to the general manager of Slough Hospital as soon as possible. Intercom again. Soon the phone rang. Hello, yes, okay. So you know who I am. I have a question for you. How much did your hospital overspend this year? So, here's the deal. You have a patient named Sally. Sorry, June. What's Sally's name? The same as your name, Crawford, June Parson replied. This was unexpected. That's right. You have a patient named Sally Crawford, a case of overdose. If she survives, your hospital will receive a check from me for £1 million. If she dies, you get nothing. Do you understand? Good. I want no corners, no expenses. Goodbye. Of course they're doing the best they can anyway, Bea commented. I don't trust those damn bureaucrats running our hospitals these days. Too often you hear about them trying to cut corners. Sometimes I just wonder. Anyway, £1 million won't hurt them, and I'm sure everything possible will be done for Sally. Right. Now let's go and get my children. I suppose that's what you came here for, June. Mrs. Crawford states in her letter that they are your children. I see nothing wrong in turning them over to you, at least for the time being. But you realize that until the judge says otherwise, They are my responsibility. You need not worry. They will be in good hands, and you can count on me to keep you informed of what happens to them. With your permission, we'll take them to my house near Swindon. There will be plenty to keep them occupied until we know how things are going with Sally. In an hour or so, we can get on the freeway to visit her in the hospital. I'm glad you think so, Mr. Crawford. Come on, we started this conversation with John and June. I'm sure the kids will be more relaxed if we keep it up. The three of us headed for the basement parking lot. Miss Parsons joined B and me in the back seat of my limo for the trip to Slough. First, we stopped by the hospital to check on Sally's condition. The doctors were not too keen to take on the case at, as they put it, such an early stage. Then, June Parsons took us to the foster home where the children were. B and I stayed in the car while she went inside to talk to the children alone first. 10 minutes later, she called me over to her, and B followed me inside. Kay and Heather, this is your Uncle John. He's going to look after you until your mom is better, June told them. We decided to give up on Uncle John until we knew how Sally would behave, and how the girls would take me. Hi, girls. This is my friend Beatrice. You can call her Aunt B. The two 10-year-old girls looked at me and B with some suspicion. Until your mom gets better, you'll be staying with Uncle John at his house in the village. I think you'll like it there. He has horses for you to ride, and the house has its own swimming pool, B added. Where's our mom? Can we see her? Asked Kay. Is she going to die? Added Heather. Well, the doctors are doing everything they can to make sure that doesn't happen, I replied. The girls still looked incredulous. We've only seen her recently, but if you want, we can stop by the hospital and you can see how hard they're working to get her well again. They might not let the kids in to see her, June remarked. They will let those children in with their mother, I assure you. Remember those pound signs, I replied. We dropped June off at the station, where she had left her car when she came into town to see me. Then we headed to the hospital. As I expected, the rules were broken and the girls were allowed into the ICU. The girls didn't cry as I expected. In fact, they turned out to be a couple of tough little cookies. Oh, and B noted a distinct family resemblance to herself. At this point, I decided to forget about the planned DNA tests. The trip to Wiltshire went fairly smoothly. Feeling at home in the limo, the girls played with just about everything. The idea of being able to watch TV while driving on the freeway was new to them. As soon as we turned off the freeway, Heather turned to me and asked, "You're our father, aren't you?" I saw no point in denying it. Yes, I consider myself one, but I have to say that I wasn't aware of that fact until today. Had it been so, you would have seen a great deal of me. We do know. Mom told us last week that she didn't tell you about us. We didn't know what she was going to do, but she said she was very rude to you and didn't tell you that you were our father. She said that you thought her other husband was our father, Heather continued. She was crying, added Kay. It's true. Maybe someday your mom will explain why she acted the way she did. Do you think she'll feel better then? Asked Kay. Well, I sure hope so. She doesn't want to get better. She wants to go to heaven, said Heather. I can't believe it, having two wonderful children like you, replied B. Mom is tired. She works so hard and there's never enough money. Well, it will be now, and she certainly won't work anymore. There, see that little house over there? The car was just entering the grounds of my estate. When she's better, I'll ask your mom if she wants to live in that house. You two can ride horses here and swim in the pool at the big house. The girls' eyes went wide as they looked at the mansion in front of which the car had stopped. Toward them, the house staff was coming down the steps. I knew that hasty preparations had been made for the arrival of the girls. One of the guest rooms with 2 single beds had been prepared for them. I think B and I were forgotten about while the staff fussed over the girls and took them away. Now that's a twist in the book, B said. I wonder why she didn't tell you they were yours. Oh, Sally must have resorted to tricks to hide the fact that she was pregnant from me. You know, now I think about it, I think she should have shown it at that last meeting we had when we were signing the divorce papers. As I recall, she was sitting at the table, hunched over, and she was wearing a long coat. I remember thinking it was a very odd thing to wear on such a nice day. I wonder why she hated me so much. After all, she was the one who cheated on me. How else did she expect me to react when I found out she was sleeping with that asshole? You'll have to ask her. That's assuming she survives. The kids were settling in pretty well, I thought. The fact that they were being fiddled with by the household staff seemed to please them a lot. Every night I tucked them into bed and told them a little about my mother and I's life together. I stopped at the last year. 2 weeks later, I walked into the room where Sally was sleeping. The night before, she had awakened conscious for the first time. I put the letter she had left in her hand and waited for her to wake up. I must have dozed off while I waited. "Hi, John. Sorry," was the first thing I heard her say. I looked at her and saw that she was looking at the letter in her hand. "How are my girls?" "They're fine. I left them in the pool this morning. I can tell you they wore out my staff. They are two wonderful girls, a real credit to you. B is bringing them back here this afternoon." "Thank you. I'm sorry I kept them from you. It was a foolish thing I did in anger. But once it happened, I couldn't think of a way to fix it." "Well, I couldn't think of a worse way than the one you chose. I'm sorry, but I was desperate. You know I owe thousands of pounds that I simply can't pay back. Robert left me in so much debt. He made me sign for everything. I think that's why he married me, because being bankrupt, he couldn't get a loan. You have no debts now, Sally. I've paid them all off. And those sharks you borrowed from are out of business for good now." "Oh, you found out about them." "It wasn't hard to do. They showed up at your apartment demanding money while one of my employees was packing up the girls' belongings. He told them to come back later, and I think they were a little surprised when they did. Rest assured, they will never bother you again." "Why are you being so nice to me? The last time you saw me, you—" "That was a long time ago, Sally, and I was still in pain then. Now it's just an unpleasant memory. It hurt me very much when I read your letter. I will have to forgive you for a long time for keeping my girls from me." "I'm so sorry. That's all I can say." "Well, as far as the girls know, we are friends now. Tomorrow, if you agree, you will be moved to my house. I have a couple of nurses who will take care of you. When you are fully recovered, you and the girls can live in one of the houses on the estate. That way, I'll be able to see them often." "You won't take the children away from me?" "No, I'm not going to take their mother away from my girls. They love you, perhaps even more than I once did. But I will make sure you never take them from me again." "I'm sorry," I all but repeat. "But I'm really sorry for all the stupid things I've done." "There's one question I want to ask you, Sally. Why did you go with that bloodthirsty creep in the first place?" "Don't you think that's a question I've asked myself 1,000 times in the last 10 years? I'm not sure I have an answer. He's been working me over very carefully for a long time. Oh, I know why he decided to do it. He told me when he realized the girls weren't his. It didn't take him long. They look so much like you. He said they couldn't fire you, something to do with their father's will. They were sure you had some of their father's money. They thought that when you didn't have a job, you'd use some of that money to, I don't know, start your own business, I guess. You were constantly being followed by private investigators. They were furious when you went to Southampton and met Simon Johnson. And a week later, 4 of the company's biggest contracts were canceled, Johnson included. But you knew this was going to happen, didn't you? I think the bank foreclosure took them by surprise. There's no way they expected this. Ta-da! The next thing that happened was the police showed up at the house. Did you know that Robert had pretty much blamed everything on the company? We had nothing. No house, no car, no anything. Robert and Tony were arrested for misuse of company funds. But I suspect you were behind it all." "No, Sally. The forces of the law moved in their own ways without my help. But Robert and Tony were paid ridiculous salaries. What were they doing with all their money?" "I don't know exactly. They both liked to gamble on the stock market, and Robert threw money around like water in the clubs. He didn't mind a little gambling, too. I think they'd already spent it all when they came up with the idea of taking you out of the firm. They planned for you to discover where all the money they were sure Henry had stashed away lay. You never explained why you went along with that asshole. Well, I was mad at you. You know Robert was very clever. He tricked me. Every time you left, he made little remarks. He would let me overhear conversations that led me to believe you had girlfriends everywhere. It's hard to explain, but I heard him discussing with Tony your spending on nightclubs and such. Oh, I'm sure they were legitimate expenses, but they were little digressions he was saying to Tony on the phone. I wasn't supposed to hear them, but of course he made sure I heard them. You know guy talk. He'd say things like, "You've got a new girlfriend in New York or Rome, and you've spent a lot of money to entertain her." They convinced me that when it comes to traveling, you want to go and meet your girlfriends, he said. But if you thought I was running after you, why didn't you challenge me? Because I couldn't bring myself to believe it. If I had challenged you and you said it was true, what would I have done then? I wasn't as strong as you. I don't think I would have been able to walk away and divorce you. I would have lived in misery. But time went on, and I began to waver in that faith. And then this play came along. You knew I wanted you to take me to it. Robert was sitting there when you called and said you were going to New York. He heard us talking and I was crying, so he comforted me. Then he drove me home so I could get your bag and then to the airport. We didn't go back to work. Robert said I was too upset. We went down to the river in Sunnydale and sat there talking all afternoon. Afterward, he took me out to dinner and to an evening play. I must have had too much to drink. I know that's no excuse, but I went to bed with him that night. I'm sure I wouldn't have done it if I hadn't had so much to drink. But that's easy to say now, isn't it? I was feeling pretty bad, and that day Robert helped me feel on top of things. After all, my so-called loving husband had just flown out to meet his girlfriend. That's what I thought. I still thought so until Robert left me. He told me all about how they had set it up. If you hadn't come home that day, they had pictures of Robert and me together. They were going to send them to you anonymously. I knew sleeping with Robert was wrong, and if it's any consolation, he wasn't very good in bed. Too selfish. I don't want to know that, Sally. I'm sorry, but he was useless at pretty much everything except hitting me. Toward the end, he got pretty good at it. When you came back and caught Robert and me together, I got angry. I don't know exactly why, but I felt like you set me up. That damn girl told me you weren't coming home until Sunday. That damn little tart. Petra. Yes, Petra. I was sure she was your thing. She's not. You think I don't realize that now? But I thought you set me up to catch me and divorce me. That made me really angry. I guess I was mad at myself. I was going to tell you about the twins the day we signed the divorce papers. That's the way I planned it. I'd sign the papers and then, before you signed them, I'd tell you about the babies. That way, I wouldn't end up using them to make you change your mind and take me back. You'd have a choice whether to sign them or not. But you were still mad at me. You know, I think that's when I should have realized that you weren't cheating on me. If you had, you wouldn't have gotten so mad at me for doing the same thing. No, you called me a goddamn slut or something and I lost my temper. I'm sorry. For God's sake, stop apologizing. What's done is done, and there's no changing that. Will you ever forgive me? Whether I will forgive you, that is the question. I may eventually forgive you, but there's no way I'll forget. But now there are two fine young ladies in the equation, and I, or rather we, must think of them. I will be polite to you at all times and expect you to be polite in return. As for the girls, you are their mother, and I will be their loving father. Just don't bring your boyfriends into my house. I've never had any boyfriends, and never will. Never is a long time, Sally. Sally recovered and lived in a small house on the estate with the girls until they went to university. Cancer took her a couple of years ago. I don't think she had the strength to fight so hard. Eventually, Bea and I got married. Did we love each other? Well, I don't think I love Beatrice the way I loved Sally. Bea and I are kind of soulmates. We love each other very much. I guess it's love, but not the same kind of love. The twins are grown and married now. They have children of their own. Bea has become a grandmother, and I think she is still too young for that title. Am I happy now? Yes and no. I wish I could live my life with the woman I love. Now I can only lay flowers on her grave. Beatrice waits at the cemetery gate every Sunday while I do that. Life goes on. The end. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.